Good morning and welcome to the BIOEPJ Juarez Annual Medical Device Manufacturing Summit. I am very happy to welcome you to our panel discussion this morning on creating sustainable supply chains on the U.S Mexico border. My name is Jackie Butler. I'm the Director of U.S Operations for BIOEPJ Juarez, and I will be acting as your moderator for this morning's discussion. Creating sustainable supply chains on the U.S Mexico border is a very ambitious discussion that we're going to be having today. At BIOEPJ Juarez, we have been working over the last 3 years to understand what the regional medical device manufacturing supply chain looks like on a very detailed level, and we know that is a huge challenge, not just for our region to understand what our capabilities and assets are here, but when you take a look at more broadly the U.S. Mexico border, and even more broadly on the global level, we get a tremendous feeling for the complexity of supply chains, and especially after the COVID-19 pandemic hit our region, we were greatly challenged with trying to map and understand where our region lies in the global supply chain and how our manufacturing sector, not just in medical devices, but more broadly across industries, was being impacted. To help us navigate through this discussion a little bit further and help us understand where supply chain issues and challenges lie today, we have a really amazing group of panelists and experts with us that I'm very happy to introduce to you now. Before I begin, I'd like to encourage you to use the comments section to share any questions that we could get to later on in the session. Right now, I'd like to introduce our 3 esteemed panelists, and then we'll get started with the presentation. First, we have Mayra Maldonado. She is the Executive Director for the Hunt Institute for Global Competitiveness at the University of Texas at El Paso. Mayra is a research economist who leads the Institute's work on binational, comparative, commercial, and financial analysis. She has worked as an economist at the Central Bank of Mexico, where she led the economic and financial analysis of Mexico's northeastern border region and its linkages with the rest of Mexico and the U.S. Mayra has also worked for Morgan Stanley Capital International, where she led the Americas Index Research and Corporate Actions team based in Mumbai, India, and Monterrey, Mexico. During her time at MSCI, she specialized in analysis of inter-American financial markets inequities. She received her BA in economics from the Instituto Tecnológico y Estudios Superiores de Monterrey, and her MA in economics from New York University through CONACYT and Fulbright scholarships. We're really excited to have Mayra with us this morning to share some insights and data points with us. Our next panelist is Prince Idichandy. He has experience in a variety of industries, including aerospace, defense, diversified manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, online retail, and real estate development. Previously, he served as a senior manager for Deloitte Consulting in the supply chain and network operations practice focused on strategy and analytics. On his most recent project, he advised a $3 billion plus international consumer goods manufacturer drive a digital transformation focused on improving supply chain visibility and SOP processes. He also advised a major government services provider on implementing RFID technology across a warehouse network to improve inventory visibility and control. He has advised clients on product development, warranty analytics, and smart manufacturing engagements. Prior to joining Deloitte, Prince has worked in several engineering operations and leadership roles at Lockheed Martin and Eaton Corporation. He holds a BS in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Welcome, Prince. And last but not least, we have Germán Dominguez on our panel this morning. Germán is internationally recognized as a renowned thought leader in direct materials, supply-based localization and rationalization, nearshoring and reshoring from Asia-Pacific's low-cost countries to Latin America's best-cost countries. A 25-year procurement experience veteran, he has worked with a wide range of OEMs and Tier 1 manufacturing companies to help them reduce their total cost of ownership by an estimated total combined of 1 billion price purchase variance. He has spearheaded over 1,000 Mexico sourcing initiatives for more than 10,000 part numbers and has personally negotiated with over 500 suppliers in Mexico. Germán has been directly responsible for increasing shareholder value by setting the strategy for the commodity negotiations in Mexico and creating the highest leverage across direct materials to drive double-digit cost reductions on the bill of materials. He provides strategic advice assisting companies in achieving their product's lowest total cost leadership position in the market, and is very, very well known and renowned here in the local manufacturing sector. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited to get the conversation going related to supply chains and how we can play a greater role here on the U.S. Mexico border, and more specifically in El Paso and Juarez. Before we begin the panel discussion, I'm really excited to welcome Mayra Maldonado, who's going to share with us a short presentation on data that the Hunt Institute has been gathering on this topic, and specifically related to trade between the U.S. and Mexico border here in the region. Mayra, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm so excited to have Germán and Prince here talking more about the anecdotal evidence from the data I'm going to be presenting here today. And thank you, Bio El Paso Juarez, for the invitation. So just let me know if I'm under presentation mode and if you see my screen. Do you see my screen well?
Yes, we see it.
Perfect. So as Jackie was saying, I'm the executive director of the Hunt Institute for Global Competitiveness here at the University of Texas at El Paso. We produce high quality market analysis tools across the cross-border region, and with emphasis here in the Paso del Norte region. Now, we usually hear all these comments about the significance of trade, of El Paso, and of the healthcare industry in trade. So I hope to provide all of the answers today with this brief presentation, and I'll be glad to respond to any questions that you may have. So I wanted to start by saying where Mexico and where the top 10 trading partners are in total trade for the U.S. And little under 20 years ago, back in 2003, it was Canada, the top trading partner. And then fast forward in 2019, it was Mexico with $537 billion. And in 2020, it was China. And basically, China, Mexico, and Canada have been the top 3 trading partners since 2003. Now, for total trade, what are the top 10 ports of entry with respect to trade along the U.S. Mexico border? We have here figures for 2019 and for 2020. We have that Laredo in Texas is the top port of entry in 2020 with $205 billion. And then next to it, El Paso with almost $73 billion. The top 5 ports of entry, this is something important to note here, account for 80% of the overall trade with the world that the U.S. has along the U.S. Mexico border. Now, we have El Paso with 15.3% and Santa Teresa with 5%. Those two combined, so we have 20% of trade that goes along the southern border here in our region. Now, we can also see that there were sharp decreases in trade for the 2020 year compared to the 2019 year. El Paso trade was decreased by roughly 8%, and Santa Teresa trade was it decreased by roughly 20%. Now, where are we with respect to the healthcare industry, the medical goods imports and exports? So not surprisingly, although surprising for many, El Paso is the #1 port of entry with respect to medical goods imports, and it accounts for 30% of medical goods imports through the southern border. And Santa Teresa accounts for 1.2%. And we see here that when opposed as to total trade, we have that medical goods imports actually increased in 2020 compared to 2019. There was a recorded gain of $700 million, or a 6.3% increase. El Paso increased only by 1.5%, Santa Teresa by 60%, and there are some other ports of entry like Eagle Pass that increased by 350% roughly. Now, one of the important aspects to analyze here is what is the profile? What are the characteristics of those imports, right? What is the structure? So you can see to your right that most imports along these 10 ports of entry are with respect to PPP, and some others with respect to medical equipment. El Paso, 53% of all of the medical goods imports are with respect to medical equipment, the vast majority. Not so for Santa Teresa, which roughly 56% goes for PPP. Now, what about medical goods exports? Well, we have now that El Paso ranks second. That's the second largest important port of entry with respect to medical goods exports on the southern border in 2020 with $2 billion and with a share of 28%. Santa Teresa with 0.5%. And we see here that with respect to exports, El Paso recorded an increase, and Santa Teresa almost 12% decrease. Now, when we go to the table on your right, we see that most of these top 10 ports of entry with respect to medical goods exports go into PPP equipment, and only 2 for medical equipment. And El Paso has a 40% share, and Santa Teresa has almost all of its exports going into PPP. One of the studies we conducted recently was to understand what are the industries, what are the job occupations here in El Paso that are concentrated, that are specialized with respect to the national average, and that are also growing or not growing. So basically, what are the sustainable industries here in El Paso? And for that, we have we estimated some location quotients, which basically means those that are beyond the horizontal line, those that are above 1%. That means that they are specialized with respect to the national average, and those that are below are under specialized. Now, when we look at those that have been growing, then we have to look at the x-axis, and we have how much they have grown. So that means that those that are next, all to the right of the vertical line, that means that those job occupations have grown during the last 8 years, from 2011 to 2019, and those to the left have been decreasing in numbers. So we have here at the very top, we found that healthcare support and healthcare practitioners and technical job occupations, along with food preparation and serving related job occupations and transportation and material moving job occupations, have not only been growing compared to other job occupations, but we are also specializing in these job occupations here in El Paso, meaning that the healthcare industry is an industry that is sustainable. It is growing, and we are also specializing with respect to the national average. And lastly, we wanted to show here what has been the impact of COVID-19 on small businesses. And the city of El Paso conducted a survey last year for those that reached out to get the business assistance program. And this is the visual, the mapping of all of those businesses. So each circle is a business that requested funding. And the bigger the circle, the more funding they received. And what we found here is that 40% of all of the businesses along the Alameda Avenue corridor were conglomerated around that area. And we also found that around 54% of all of the businesses related to the healthcare industry are in this area. So this is important to note because we identified some corridors that you can see here around Donovan, Mesa Street, Dyer Street, Montana, and all of that. But we also need to have the identification of some supply chains within El Paso. And I think that this covers the data piece for trade. I hope this is clear for you about how we stand with respect to trade and with respect to the healthcare industry. And I will be open to any questions by the end of this presentation. I'll give the word to Prince.
Thank you so much, Mayra, for that presentation. It's interesting to see the growth between imports and exports in medical goods over the last year. Not surprising to, I think, the manufacturers who are on the line to see those numbers. But as a community, it's important to see the data and to acknowledge the huge role that our region plays in the production of medical devices, the import-exports that are primarily bound for the United States, but are also reliant on global supply chains for those components and raw materials. So to begin our conversation, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. If you can go ahead and join me, and we can start the conversation. So I just, Mayra gave us a really great snapshot of the local data and what that is looking like post COVID. I was wondering if I wanted to open it up with you, Prince, to talk about kind of what the global situation looks like with supply chains now. We're all seeing the news about, the ports in Los Angeles being backed up for months and months now. And I think we're curious about what those trickle down effects are to manufacturing and production. What are you seeing and what are those trends looking like right now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's incredible how things that are happening all the way across the world have a profound impact on this region, right? So the way I would kind of characterize it is if we kind of look at both the supply and the demand side, from the perspective of business, a lot of businesses that I have advised, they're kind of hit with a quandary where their sales have gone through the roof during COVID because of a number of factors I'll talk about, but at the same time, the supply shocks have prevented them from being able to actually fulfill, right? So I think one of the major things that we've had the shortages in critical components, especially in the electronic component area. That's had far-reaching impacts on all sorts of industries, especially automotive, as we can tell. And even in the secondary market, folks talking about used cars and the shortages there, right? What that also turns into is just the shipping rate, especially from an ocean freight perspective. That's increased significantly. And there's a couple of drivers for that. One is physically the actual for ocean carriers themselves are they're very long lead items, obviously, and so the planned production schedules for those ocean carriers haven't kept up with the sudden shock of COVID and all the things that have happened there. I think the other piece I wanted to mention was just around container production as well. Not sure how many folks are aware of it, but essentially physical ocean container production is concentrated in the hands of several three major manufacturers. And the actual cost of steel has actually impacted the fact that it's really only economical for them to produce these materials. And so there's a shortage there. And a part of that is also, some people speculate that, there's a strategic decision that those three companies want to keep the prices high there. So they are kicking up production, but it's not keeping up with the demand either, right? And the final thing, and I think you mentioned this, Jackie, was just around port delays. The recent estimations and projections I've seen see that we're probably not going to see relief there for at least until well into next year, just because we're about to hit the holiday rush. There's Chinese New Year coming up. There's just so many things happening that continue to keep that up. And then, we need to catch up with a lot of the backlog that's still there, basically, in a nutshell, right? So all of this kind of makes, from a supply side, a lot of the companies I'm advising think a lot more about overland shipping. And so we can talk about that a little bit more. But obviously, one of the clients I work with, they have a lot of contract manufacturers in Asia, and they're freaking out, frankly, because they're trying to figure out, well, there's no other way to get this product here. Do I beef up my supply chain in other geographies, right? So we can talk about what that implies for this region. On the demand side, as I was saying, I kind of alluded to the fact that COVID kind of created this double whammy where demand increases and there's a supply shock. Well, a lot of that is because over the last 10 to 15 years, we've trained consumers across the world, frankly, to really rely on online retail, right? And so that behavior has kind of been doubled down upon, if you will, during COVID, where we had lockdowns, people are at home. One of the clients I work with, they're a consumer products company, and it's funny how when a lot of their customers were at home, they noticed, hey, I really could use another one or two more of this product, and then that's where the sales numbers increase significantly. So anyway, that's the supply and demand equation. I would say, to kind of summarize, it is a dire situation. And a lot of companies are kind of looking at two things. One is, how do we use technology better in order to get better data so we can respond to these things in a more agile way? But then, as I alluded to, from a strategic perspective, where do I source from? Do I move out of some of those contract manufacturers that I've relied on for so many years? So there are huge changes, and these are changes that these companies aren't taking lightly. And the only thing I would add is, because of how long COVID has run, I think clients are really now realizing this is not maybe going to go away anytime soon, so we need to make some tough decisions. So that's kind of the market, I think, as I see it in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks so much for that insight. I saw Germán kind of, pique his interest at the sourcing from China and East Asia. And I know, Germán, you do this on a daily basis. So what are you hearing from these OEMs and manufacturers who source from these countries? What are they dealing with right now?
Well, one of the things that we're pleased to see at the C-level of OEMs, companies, and large corporations is that they now have a commitment to supply-based reshoring and localization and growing and developing the local supply base. That was not present before. And so now it makes all the difference, because there is a commitment from the top senior leadership at each one of these companies. And so what we're seeing is companies are right now, a lot of our clients are in the middle of their budgeting process for next year. All of them are budgeting for this type of initiatives, for supply-based development, for supply-based localization initiatives. They know that with those budgets, they have to account for new tooling, because they have to retool everything. The incumbent supply chains that they're currently are working with overseas, they know they're probably not going to be able to transfer existing tooling. And so we're working on several initiatives to retool each and every one of these production lines that we're transferring from overseas to North America. So it is interesting. I want to mention something regarding the port congestion. And that applies to our region in El Paso and Juarez. The northern region of Mexico and the southern region of the U.S. is that we are not really taking advantage of the Mexican ports. We have been so accustomed to use the LA and the Long Beach port that we've lost sight, and we no longer are conscious about other options. Some of the time, so most of the time, more readily available, I would say, cost effective, such as the Ensenada port. And so what we're doing right now is, as part of the supply-based localization initiatives, we are also setting up new logistical strategies, and that involves making changes on the the destination, ports of destination. Now, one thing that we're seeing, I'm going to give you an example, is that the majority, if not all, of the overseas suppliers and manufacturers, they only know a couple of ports in North America. They don't really know all the diversification and variety that we have to accept shipments from overseas. A good example is when we ask them to, because we're also working with Chinese suppliers to make the transition, and a lot of them are investing right now in the El Paso, Juarez region. But when we ask them to change the destination to a Mexico port, we're seeing that they only know one port, which is Manzanillo. That's the largest port in Mexico, but it's not the only port. And when it comes to our region, the best option for us is Ensenada port. So just keep that in mind as you continue, bringing back some of that production lines. Another thing is that what we're seeing here is that we have to focus on increasing the install capacity in the regional manufacturing industry. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to accept all of these opportunities. And so it is, very important that, in addition to, I've already talked about the budgeting process and the CapEx process, right? Well, that CapEx, in addition to tooling, has to consider, expansion, infrastructure. And so that is an important part. Again, we won't be able to go that far without having the infrastructure to service, those opportunities. And so we have to recognize that this window of opportunity that we have right now in front of us, we have not seen that in the last 25 years. I've been in the global sourcing industry for 26 years. I started my career 1995 with General Motors, and I've never seen this type of opportunity for our region, for our countries, for North America. And so looks like we have to, get out of our status quo, and we're going to have to implement some drastic changes in the way we're operating right now, our supply chains, to be able to graduate to the next level. But it's very important that we recognize as well that everything that we do, any initiative that we undertake, the end goal is to have a long-term sustainability. Now, the sustainability in the long run will only come from our ability to become more competitive as an industry and as a region primarily. Yeah. So as long as we don't lose sight that the end goal is to become more competitive so that we can become globally competitive, right? It's not enough to say, yes, we're more competitive. The El Paso Juarez region is more competitive than other areas. That's not enough. We have to continue to, benchmark globally. You have to get benchmarks at the global level so that we can continue that continuous improvement process of the competitive landscape.
Right. Mayra, you have something to add?
Yes, I want to mention something. I'm in total agreement with Prince and Germán, and I just want to add something. We are having a once in a lifetime opportunity here. There is a structural change going on, right? And that structural change means that it'll take some time to relocate, to have that supply base here near shore versus offshore. So it's a matter of coping with that opportunity in terms of skilled workforce, right? Okay, healthcare is a significant industry. Are we providing the sufficient skills to our workforce? Infrastructure, right? Physical infrastructure, technology, and thinking about ways to help those businesses and how to create that expanded supply base here nearby.
That's great input. Thanks, Mayra and Germán. Just to follow up on what you were discussing, and anybody feel free to chime in here, but when Prince was talking about all of the issues, it sounds like it's getting costlier and costlier to source these components and raw materials, to ship them to the United States or to Mexico, to become manufactured. And we know the manufacturing sector is driven by price and cost, right? So how does that conversation go with a tier one supplier or an OEM to talk about the cost benefit analysis between continuing to pay these high costs that are due to supply chain disruptions versus reshoring or nearshoring to North America?
One of the things that we're seeing is that the pain is greater to continue to work with overseas supply chains than the pain that it takes for a company to get out of their comfort zone, right, and start implementing these changes. It takes effort, it takes time, and it takes money. But the focus has to be on the extended enterprise. So as opposed to having an overseas vendor base, the ideology that we're bringing to the table is that we have to develop strategic partnerships with strategic suppliers under an extended enterprise framework. And that changes the whole perspective when you're working with an extended enterprise focus with only strategic vendors or suppliers that price doesn't become the primary qualification. We have strategic reasons to continue developing suppliers locally. And so, a good example is the textile industry. For example, the regional textile industry, which is underdeveloped, and the textile industry in Mexico right now is undertaking several research and development initiatives to be able to better integrate with the medical manufacturing industry application requirements. So we have now textiles that are being implemented as part of an assembly that goes into a medical device. And so that takes, again, investment in CapEx, new machinery and equipment, but we're seeing that happening now, right? Before, small business owners and investors were like, well, I don't really need to invest in new machinery and equipment, but we're now seeing that what investment should I be making? Those are the questions that we're getting from our clients. Okay, where should I invest?
Right.
What type of machinery, equipment, or processes should I be bringing in-house, and what should I be outsourcing to streamline my supply chain? And we just, that type of conversation takes the meaning of supply chain to a whole new level.
Right. It's a perspective shift.
Exactly.
Prince, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna. There's a data point I wanted to throw out there to underline the fact that OEMs are really thinking hard about reshoring. There is a study that showed that last year during COVID, 54% of the individual companies that were surveyed were likely to think about reshoring to North America. That's jumped up to 83%, which is incredible. And it's on everyone's mind. And I think to Germán's point, it is a strategic decision implies that there is a time scale there as well, right? You have to be willing to do something that maybe your payback period is a little bit longer than you would have expected in the past. So that's one thing to think about. And the only thing I would add is, to Mayra's point around the cluster analysis within the region, when you're trying to improve the prospects of a particular region, there's always going to be healthy competition, but also healthy collaboration on certain things as well, right? So if it is strategic to do something together, there needs to be that pull, and sometimes that's not just from the private side. There needs to be that thought process because it's a rising tide analogy, I think, about that.
Right. I was commenting before the panel about how important data is to both government and nonprofit organizations that are trying to support supply chain development, especially during COVID. I mean, we saw the mad rush to try to gather data about what's happening, who's producing what, and how much of it, and who has capacity and who doesn't. BIOEPJ was very involved in those discussions. But frankly, it's always been a challenge to gather that information from manufacturers and suppliers, unless you have built that direct relationship with leadership at that organization. It's like, staring into a dark hole trying to get some of this critical data. So Mayra, my question to you is, from publicly available data sources that you all have access to and can analyze, what are those indicators that you look for to understand kind of the impact of these supply chain challenges when we can't get detailed data from the manufacturing sector?
Well, it's as simple as anecdotal evidence, such as the information that Prince and Herman are providing, because data, yes, is the foundation to provide some strategies and recommendations, but we also have to match it with anecdotal evidence. Sometimes data says one thing which may be in contradiction to anecdotal evidence. And one of the core pieces is to understand why that's the case. And going back to Herman's point, so we also conduct some analysis. I think, for example, with respect to the textile industry, we know that the PPP, the personal protective products, many textile industries were started to be innovative, right? And started to create these products after COVID-19 and after they learned that there was an increased demand. So we knocked on their doors and to look for more information besides data. There's a lag, and in particular during COVID-19, we needed to have more anecdotal information because public information was not readily available. And also I have to say that the city of El Paso is beyond other cities because they were clever enough to conduct a survey for that business assistance program that I was mentioning. And that's something that other cities lack. Mm-hmm. We now have, because of this effort, we now have the analysis of how COVID-19 impacted small businesses and in which way that will help the community to understand the impact, but also to come forward with strategies and recommendations.
Okay.
I just want to jump in and just mention what Mayra says. A good business case, a local successful business case is what BMP is doing in the textile industry right here in Juarez. So BMP is a multinational corporation. They supply large OEMs such as Whirlpool on the appliance, but now they are, again, this research and development, as they have continued to introduce new product developments for the personal protection equipment and for the medical industry is an example of a regional success business case that we're seeing BMP. We've worked with BMP for many years, and we're currently developing new projects that we are actually reshoring from China to North America. And BMP has been instrumental in helping us achieve that business case justification.
That's great to hear. As you mentioned, Herman, textiles are definitely underdeveloped here in the region, and so anything we can do to support in those efforts, please let us know. We did have several other manufacturers in aerospace and automotive that we've spoken to over the last year who are doing that business case analysis to see if we expand into medical, what does that mean? What, in terms of financial commitment and so on. And one of the programs that BIO Paso Juarez has is a training service where we can support OEMs for either training their staff or helping them get their ISO 13485 certification, in many cases free of charge, so that we can support those efforts to expand into medical devices here in the region. So now that we're all aware of what the issues are, let's turn to discussing some solutions that can be implemented here, like what Germán is saying, supporting these manufacturers in their expansion efforts. What, based on your experiences, Prince, and working with different companies over the last few years, what are those lessons learned for how to overcome some of the shocks that we're seeing now and that we've seen over the last year and a half? And what does that mean for the future of supply chain development?
Yeah, no, that's also a great question, and I think a logical next step. Maybe I'll start by kind of giving you an example of kind of an issue a client had that I worked with. It's the same client. They have a lot of contract manufacturers in Asia. Because of the lack of data from their suppliers, they don't know in some cases when they're going to get what shipment. And even more ridiculous in some ways is which container ship their container is on. So they literally have an individual at some of the ports in Malaysia running around trying to figure out, like, is this shipment on this ship or where is it, right? And so there's a whole manual aspect of that. So a lot of the pain points you hear from clients dealing with overseas manufacturers is, and it's the nature of the business. It's a world away. The data's manual. Some of the suppliers are not as sophisticated. So one big takeaway is data quality. That's one major thing I'd put out there. The other major thing I'd say is, are you easy to do business with? Because a lot of these OEMs that I've worked with, the reason they outsourced in the beginning was really to just, hey, I want to get a lot of these assets off my books. I want to focus on the marketing side and really drive sales. And they're hoping to trust a supplier with a lot of that functionality, right? And so, to the point of becoming a strategic supplier, as Germán said, I think it's investments in technology. So, working with your buyers on collaborating in their supplier portal, making sure you're sharing a lot of these production schedules, and making the entire process easy for their procurement department. If you're able to do that, I think it really creates the business case for a procurement officer and one of these buyers to keep doing business with you. So that's one major thing. I think beyond that, but the other thing a lot of these OEMs are really thinking about is, where do I need to put my new capacity? Because these conversations are now going up in C-suite where they're asking, do I put distribution centers in different parts of the country, right? And I think to the extent that you can help build trust with them, they may start to mirror their way their supply chain network looks like to kind of help you out, to be frank. And I think a lot of it is building trust at that C-suite level. And I think you're only going to be able to get that if you're reliable, the data is reliable, and you have a track record of great performance. So that's kind of what I would say at the micro level in terms of how to kind of solve this issue.
Okay, that's great feedback. Germán, what do you think we could do at the local and regional level to support your efforts for sourcing and into Mexico and reshoring and nearshoring? I heard what you said about taking advantage of the Mexican ports and working on logistical strategies. But at the detailed level, what can our communities do to support those efforts on a bigger scale?
We also have to continue the education process. So when it comes to the medical manufacturing industry, there are some regulations that are still not well known or understood. Some requirements from the market, right? Certifications that have to be complied. And so it is very important that as part of the development process that we're doing, that we always consider education, right? So for example, the supply base in El Paso, Juarez region, and in Mexico they're becoming more conscious about the need for this type of certifications such as and regulations and best practices such as good manufacturing practices. They're understanding that the raw materials have to be certified, some of them depending on application by the FDA. And so as we continue to focus on not only the and this is the tier one supply base. And again, when I say tier one, is not only for the automotive industry, it's now used for every industry, just like the PPAP is used now on many other industries in addition to the automotive. So when I say tier one, is the final assembly supplier, but also we can't lose sight of the tier two, tier three, and even tier four supply base. We have to increase our raw materials production regionally and in North America. That's what we're seeing, right? A good example is what's happening with the steel industry in North America, right? All the investment that we're seeing is happening on the steel industry. I like to see that happening more on the thermoplastic resin industry. We're still not seeing that at the level that we're seeing on the steel industry. And even though this is happening on the carbon steel side of the steel, we also would like to see that more type of investment on the stainless steel, which is used in the medical industry. So when it comes to the job that we're doing, we're currently sponsoring tier one, tier two, tier three, and even tier four suppliers to pursue this type of certification, FDS, for their raw materials to become FDA certified so they can start integrating into the regional supply base. The investment infrastructure that I just talked about, what we're seeing regionally and in Mexico is that in order to accommodate the requirements from large OEMs regarding, for example, clean room facilities, we've been witnessing how this type of investment is skyrocketing in the last 6 months alone. And so, again, there's not enough right now. This type of infrastructure, we need more. We need to continue investing more in this type of initiatives.
Thanks, Germán. And Mayra, just, based off of the data that you presented to us earlier and the import-export growth over the last year alone, do you think that's enough to make a case about the need for investing in this industry here in El Paso and Juarez?
Yes, and not only with respect to trade, but also with respect to the sustainability of this industry at the regional level, without taking into consideration trade, right? So we showed how it is specializing, we showed that it's growing, and we also showed how relevant and significant El Paso is to overall trade and to the medical goods trade. I would also like to mention that we have a unique opportunity, not only after COVID-19, but also with respect to the location that we have. So the education piece, we can also have some exchange of workers, right? In industries here in the U.S. and in Mexico, right? With not many like high costs, right? With no high costs. And we also need reliable data, as Prince was saying. And with respect to the data, I would say that it is relevant to map out the suppliers side, yes, with respect to the supply chain, but also with respect to the buyers, so that businesses know where to relocate, where to have their distribution centers and all of that. I think that's also key right now during these times.
Great point. Thank you, Mayra. We have just a few minutes, 5 minutes left on the panel. I'd like to get some final thoughts from Prince and Germán. Prince, we talked a little bit about technology, but what do you see as the most impactful technologies that are out there or that need to be developed in order to make an impact, both at the regional level, but globally as well, in terms of improving the supply chain issues that we're seeing today?
Yeah, I would kind of go back to the point around data quality. And the reason I brought that up is, if you think about it from an OEM's perspective, when you have a supply shock, I think all OEMs have PTSD now because of COVID, right? So they're going to be thinking about how do I find a supplier that has good data? And the whole reason for that is their internal machinery is around supply and operations planning. So it's like S&OP processes around, where is my product today? Do I need to cut my promotions from marketing's perspective in order to make up for the fact that maybe my supplier won't be able to meet the demand? So those sorts of decisions all are dependent on how good your data is. A client I was working with, they literally had a task force 3 hours a day for a good 3 weeks with all their top executives trying to figure out where was product, what is the latest data from the supplier. So I would say, to kind of answer the question, the solutions that need to really be built is data sharing solutions, I think, between suppliers and OEMs. There's a lot out there, and a lot of times the OEM will go ahead and invest. But I think even without such a platform, proactively sharing data, proactively sharing analytics about where your production schedule is, all of that makes life way easier for an OEM and makes you much more attractive. So I think that's one major thing. And I think beyond that, just in general, I think as Mayra said, figuring out who's out there in the market, figuring that out is also, it's difficult. And it is something that probably needs to be done. But the reality is, supply chain is a very, very complex thing from sector to sector. It's different. Sometimes you have very integrated supply chains where sometimes a tier 1 in some situation is a tier 2 in others, but in other situations it's very cut and dry. So very complex, a very daunting task, but in the very far future, I could see something like that.
Okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. Germán, we have just a few minutes left, so I want to leave the final word with you. Aside from some of the challenges that we've talked about related to data and technology and logistics strategies, do you see any other major barriers or challenges that we can work with as a community, or call on, government or economic development organizations to really rally around and support these efforts to see major impact here in the near future?
But I think automation will continue to be key to consolidate our manufacturing industry regionally. But the type of automation that we've seen so far, so for the maquiladora industry, it's going to have to evolve. And it's going to have to be a different type of automation that relies more on Internet of Things, right? And so the data-driven automation, it's very important that we understand that as part of our future for manufacturing. And so we are strong in automation regionally. Luckily for us, we are strong. We have very good capabilities in automation, but we have to make sure that we continue, growing in terms of the technology for the automation that we are now making regionally. Another thing is new product development capabilities. Okay, so we've been talking about this, and we know we have to create those new NPD capabilities regionally. It is also imperative in the short term that we focus on new product development in El Paso and Juarez. We have the know-how, we have the knowledge, we have the engineering expertise, but somehow we're still not taking full advantage of that. And so we have to continue putting this type of new product development initiatives on the table and continue working on that. We have to create more technical centers now for the medical industry, right? And that's also related to, regionally, El Paso Juarez area is a competitive labor cost wise, but again, we have to pursue differentiation, and that differentiation cannot be linked to a low labor cost. It has to be linked to technology, new product development, automation, so on and so forth. So as we continue to become more of a technology-oriented region, we're going to be paving the way to that sustainability in the future.
Wow, you set up what I was going to say next, which is our next two panels deal both with technology adoption within the industry, as well as innovation and acceleration, and how we support that at the local and regional levels. So thanks so much, Herman, for touching on those. They're absolutely critical aspects of developing the industry further. And as you said, as we develop the industry, we'll become stronger sources for supply chain development and production here in the region. We're out of time, so I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all so much for your insights and for your participation today. I hope that our audience enjoyed the discussion, and know that Prince and Herman and Mayra are great resources that you can reach out to for these types of issues if you want further discussion. So thank you again very much.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you,
Thanks.
BIOEPJ Paso Juarez.
Before everybody logs off, I just wanted to take a moment again to remind you that we have two more panels coming up for today's event. Our next panel will begin at 12 p.m. And it is focused on digital transformation of medical device manufacturing, industrial applications of immersive technologies in highly regulated industries. We have a great panel lined up for that discussion, so we hope you will join us. And then at 1:30 p.m., we have our final panel on the future of medtech innovation and acceleration. So great discussions to further explore how we can support the development of the medical device industry here in the region. And then we hope that you'll be available and will join us for our closing reception at the Cita in Ciudad Juarez from 5 to 7 p.m. tonight. Now, one last thing before we finish, we do have a short 3-minute randomized networking opportunity for those of you who would like to interact with other attendees. If you would like to, please go to the homepage of the event and go under the networking section, and that will begin in about 2 minutes. We'll have 3 minutes for networking opportunities. So we hope that you'll be able to take advantage of that, and we'll see you at 12 o'clock for our next panel. Thank you.